Again, just look at all of us on Erev Rosh Hashanah. It's very exciting. I know it's very exciting to be together, and it's somehow so hard to believe that it's actually here, at least for me. And I will just tell you, for most of us here on the West Coast, it's 8 o'clock, and I woke up this morning thinking, okay, before I get into class, I'm just going to run down to the kitchen and get one thing into the oven. Just put some butternut squash in while I'm teaching, and I'll be that much farther ahead. And of course, somehow I managed to just hit a new bottle of balsamic vinegar, which of course went tumbling down, shattering, making a huge, dangerous, dark mess. So there you have it. Let that be a siman for the end of 5780 and all kinds of new things to come. So as we're coming in, especially this morning, I really do want to focus on our prayer and what we've learned so far and what we can learn this morning that can really help our prayer this Rosh Hashanah, however it's going to look, however you're planning to do it. So I'd love to just start, as we've been doing, with checking in about Hitbodedut practice. Anything new you learned, any new challenges, what happened this week? Did it not happen? Did it happen more often, less often? Anything is welcome. Yes, David.
So I found myself just trying to make it conversational. Just, hey, good morning, God. And just take it down from the heavy. I probably need to go there. It could be I'm not, digging deeply enough in myself, but I'm beginning to enjoy the conversation.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you for that sharing. I think that's really helpful. I think that, sometimes when we feel like we start with an address to, God, that we feel like it has to be the deepest, darkest secrets. And it doesn't. It can be like, the air's clean. This is what happened. I'm thinking about this errand, right? Because that is what's going on for us in the same way. All right, Judah raised a hand, and then Susan, and then Jeannie.
So I've been very good at this, and it's jerky at times, which is okay. I mean, there's long silences, but we all know that silence is good. And I'm glad I've started this practice, and thank you for teaching it to us. And your balsamic bottle may be the end of the year, but I want to say I have this view of miles and miles out my window, and when I woke up this morning was the first time, I think maybe in a month, that I saw a blue sky, and I went, what is that? And again, another present from Hashem was that there were white clouds, so there was a contrast. And so I'm looking at that as, it's the end of the old year, but it's also the beginning of the new year. So I just wanted to add that.
Amen. Thank you. Yes, Susan.
And so yesterday, I have been practicing all week, but yesterday, just being able to walk, with the good air. I took a walk in Golden Gate Park to the botanical gardens and went specifically to the fragrance, the garden of fragrance. And it just smelling and thanking, God for the beauty. That was very powerful to me.
Oh, thank you so much. What a beautiful idea for a walk, and a wonderful reminder that, sometimes the conversation can just be noticing what's actually happening in that moment. And if you feel gratitude, then saying thank you for it. It's a beautiful practice. Thank you. Jeannie.
Well, speaking of walks, I had been sitting in my garden and setting the timer to see if I could fill 5 minutes. And yesterday I took my walking poles, and early in the morning when it was foggy and nice and cool outside, I had the most engaged conversation that I've had so far. And really, I think it went on for a long time. I had a lot to say in trying to make peace with what this holiday observance will be, really, and other things. Some just partaking of the sky, and some not. But it was interesting to me. I had no idea. It may have been 30 minutes. Very engaged conversation. So the walking was just a lovely thing for me to do.
Wonderful. Thank you. And so I want to take two sort of practice notes from that. One is shaking it up can sometimes change things. So if you've been sitting, then maybe trying walking. Walking in general is the way that this was imagined, and walking in nature. So if you haven't tried it, that's sort of the ideal. And if there's space for that in Rosh Hashanah, that might be a really great intention to try. And the second practice note is just that for any of us, I see many people here who have committed to different spiritual practices, whether they are minyan, right, or meditation, or daily learning, whatever it is, or even, running or different physical exercise. Anyone who commits to doing the same thing pretty much every day learns that thing, right? In the beginning, you're focusing more on what you're doing. And then as you come to do it, it becomes a vehicle, because you're not thinking about it as much, for engaging what else is going on with you, right? And so it makes sense that as you get less self-conscious, right, about how am I supposed to do this? What am I doing? And you get more used to the form, then it allows for a different part of you to start engaging, right? So, so wonderful. Any other? Yes, Linda.
I don't know how I live without it. It feels so natural to me. I've only been doing it, 2 weeks? As you know, I go walking early every morning, and I always incorporate this now. And one morning I had so much going on, I had to, say hello, goodbye, God, in like 2 minutes, because I didn't have the time, and I really missed it. Yeah. So what a marvelous, I've read about it for decades too. It's not like I didn't know, but not until you have I actually known exactly how to do it. So thank you.
Well, thank you for saying so. And also, I really want to just say that I think that's true of practice in general too. We can hear about something forever, but actually doing it is a really different thing. And I want to say I appreciate the shout out to me. And yes, I'm excited. I think it was a good idea, but it really takes community, right? That's why I always leave time in the beginning, because hearing other people's experiences, whether they're yours or not, I think is really just knowing that other people are doing this and there's going to be a place for a check-in is really strengthening. So it's something that we're all doing for one another. Okay, great. Last call. I'd love to hear anyone else, or we can move into our learning. All right, let's move into our learning. I'm really excited for our learning this morning. I will confess that when this idea first came, when literally I was speaking with Rabbi Ain and Rabbi Russell, and he was like, I'd love for you to do like a recurring series, maybe with some kind of a practice. And I was like, it just like came to me in a flash. And the first person I considered, the first prayer hero, was clearly Hannah, right? Who is, for me, in some ways, the star of Rosh Hashanah Day 1, right? She's the Haftorah of tomorrow. And I'm going to just keep saying it out loud so I actually start to believe that it's actually here. And so I thought it would be a really great idea to look at the prayer of Hannah in some ways to re-inspire us to think about what personal address prayer is to God. And I just want to note, right, already before we start, since we're centering this in this idea of hitbodedut, she's outside, right? And I just want you to, maybe you've probably read this story, maybe for some of you it's your first time, and if it is, how exciting, it's such a cool story. But if you've read it a million times, maybe this time, with whatever experience of hitbodedut that you've had before, now we get to look at it as, how did she know what to do? How did she actually do it? What is the content of the speech itself? And I'll post the text in the chat. You should have already hopefully gotten it from me in your email. But you'll note in the text that I gave you, I did highlight just the part that is her personal prayer, right? And you'll notice it's just a couple verses. It's really short, but powerful. And I included the rest of it because I thought the frame of what else happens also can teach us a lot about prayer. But in your Chavruta, I would love for you to focus on what the actual words of the prayer are, and then feel free to talk about everything else. I also gave you on your sheet just a few. This conversation in the Babylonian Talmud in Masechet Brachot, I know some of you have looked at this before, goes on for pages. They can't stop talking about Hannah. She inspires so much conversation in the rabbis for what prayer is. So I just pulled a couple of little pieces about how she prayed and what she said, that if we get to them, we'll talk about them, but they're just, in some ways, they're a guide for how to do a close reading on understanding how much you can get out of a few words if you really pay attention. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to say about this before we go into Chavruta, just for the sake of reminding anyone who it's been a while since they saw the story of Hannah, or if you haven't looked at it before, Hannah is going to be the mother of Samuel, Shmuel, the prophet, and to which there are two books of the prophets, two books of the Torah, Samuel 1, Samuel 2. This is the very beginning of Samuel 1, and it begins with this family drama. There's one man, Elkanah, two wives, Pnina and Hannah. And this part's not in your text, so that's why I'm going over it. Pnina has a lot of children. Hannah desperately wants children, has none. And her husband, Elkanah, loves her. And Hannah is just as many people who suffer. Of course, it still happens all the time. So many of our friends, ourselves, our family, infertility is such a struggle for so many. She's just so desolate from this. And we can talk more about why, perhaps, but that's the situation when we get started here. So I'm going to put you into rooms, and let's take till 8:35, because I want to make sure everybody has a good amount of time with this. And I will probably come around, but let me know if you send a question to me if you want. And in terms of what the questions are, I think I went over that. It's always your questions, but then especially look at the prayer and think about what we learn about personal prayer from Hannah. Okay, and I'll throw in an extra question just because I kind of like this one with Hannah. Here's the question. Does she get what she asked for? And what is it that she's asking for? Okay, great. Whew, can't wait. All right, let's go. Did you get your breakout room, Linda?
Yeah, let's see. Oh,
If you go to
I
breakout
did.
rooms, it might be there. Hi, Dale. Welcome. Welcome back, everyone. Everyone else should be back in the next 2 seconds. Nothing is as reliable as Zoom kicking you from a breakout room into the main room. Okay. This is just such a great text. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts, reflections, insights, questions are. Anyone want to start us off with what happened in your group?
Well, I learned from Sandy that this is the first example of a prayer set outside of the temple.
Excellent.
Private prayer.
Private prayer, right. Right, in the time of the temple, right? Of course, we had like the, Moses praying for Sister Miriam and Eliezer praying for guidance, to find Isaac's wife. But yes, and this is a big deal, very, very big. Yeah. Here's a question I have. I'll just throw this out as I've taught this text literally probably dozens of times. And yet there's always something new that strikes me. And this year I was just wondering, perhaps inspired by our learning and practice together. Here's a question that I have that I don't feel is answered in the text. So I think it's really open. Do you think she came with a plan to do this? Or do you think she didn't? Sandy.
Well, I don't think she necessarily did. I think she was so emotionally overwrought that she was just trying everything she could to figure out how to deal with this, and that she just came. I mean, this was one thing to do, and with all the emotion that she had.
Yes, I think that there is support for that in the text, right? When Eli, the priest, says to her, how much longer are you gonna keep up your drunken behavior here? And she says, "Oh no, my lord, I am a very unhappy woman. I have drunk no wine or other strong drink, but I've been pouring out my heart to the Lord. I've only been speaking all this time out of my great anguish and distress." Right? So it's somewhat interesting to me that she, in describing what is true about her experience, she actually doesn't use the word prayer, but the text does, right? The text is really clear, V'tipalel Chana, right? That what she is doing is praying, but she doesn't necessarily say that to Eli. And I don't know, I just got really interested in this whole idea of, has she actually been doing this? Has this actually been a practice of hers from her pain and suffering? And so when it's the day, the pilgrimage festival, is she actually rooted in what she wants to say because she's been practicing the form? And that, or was this just the dam breaking and it all came out? And we don't, I'm just going to say something, and I want to say, like, this is sort of like the question that came up for me, but I'm more than happy to talk about your questions too. Sandra. Oh, you need to unmute first.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, gotcha.
Yeah, just from my knowledge of human behavior and working with people, I think she did have an unconscious plan, especially if she's been feeling this anguish. It's been going on inside of her, who knows how long she has been wanting to have a child. Maybe this has been going on for years. So her opportunity came, and she expressed what was in her mind. So I think maybe it wasn't conscious, but I think it was something intentional.
Great, thank you, Sandra. Betsy, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more to the side of it was quite spontaneous, because although Sandra's, might be right, we know that she's had years and years and years of going up to the temple at this time and always going through this ritual and always feeling so grief-stricken. But it was that Penina pushed her that time. And so she was just in a much more elevated state of sensitivity and grief to her deep desire that year after year hadn't been responded to. So I don't know, to me, I'm feeling like it's less likely that it was intentional and more likely that it was spontaneous.
Great. And just to, since this is what I do, to provide sort of textual support for Betsy's view here, right? Why was it written up this year, right? It's very clear in the text that it says every year this happens, every year they come, and it seems to suggest that what's happening this time is really different, right? Sarah Ann, yeah.
One of the things that struck me this time, reading it this time, was that when she left, the line says it's something like she left and she ate and she was no longer downcast. And this is before her prayer is answered. And there's something that feels like she got to express herself and her pain, and Eli validated her, not just as a person praying, but he also gives her a blessing. And so I wonder if that's a part of what was also different this year, is that her hitbodedut was actually not babidud. It wasn't totally alone. And there's something about the amen that she got from Eli that I wonder if that's a part of this dynamic here also.
Thank you for that comment. I sort of want to parse out that I think one of the pieces you said, which is so poignant this year too, is she was met in her prayer.
Yeah.
Right. And one of my questions is, okay, so Eli's one possibility of locus of meeting, right? That they did meet, and look, amazing. She didn't just yell at him, they actually ended up having this conversation, which is in the Talmud, a model for tshuva, right? Eli says, I'm sorry. And then he goes the next step, shows her that he heard what she was actually doing and blesses her with it, right? Yeah. Masterclass, one verse, tshuva, great. So she's met by Eli, but here's the question, and I appreciate also your attention to it says right before that she couldn't eat or drink, right? Yeah. Yeah. And then right after she eats again. And so the question is, did she feel met by the object of her address, right? Yeah. Did she feel in her prayer itself, was it just catharsis? And just might be meaningless. Catharsis might mean she felt met, right? Or that it worked. Or here's the question that's looming behind what I'm trying to say. How do you know when you're praying that you're heard? When do you feel heard, right? And how much does it matter on some kind of, weird objective scale of even imagining what it looks like in God's world for God to hear versus how do we just feel heard? When do we feel heard, right? And I think that's a really interesting question for hitbodedut practice, that many of you have now experience with. Is there a difference sometimes, some quality, when you feel accompanied or heard versus when you just feel like you're speaking into the ether and like, you know, what it's just you, versus when it's got maybe a thickness or a different quality, or you just feel different after it. Yeah, Stuart.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because you just reminded me that that's exactly what I was thinking about last night when I was doing Heat Bodedut. And I was thinking, well, how many times has God spoken with Hebrews? You know, handful of times, more than a handful of times. And who does God speak with? No, he speaks with the whole nation at Sinai. He speaks through the prophets, but he doesn't speak with people, average people, every day or at all. And so in our Hippolyte practice, you know, I was thinking, well, okay, I'm talking to you, but when and how will I know that you're, as you just pointed out, answering me? And I was really troubled with that last night, you know, thinking, is it chutzpah on my part to think that God should be communicating with me the way God communicates with Moshe, you know, with a prophet? And I answered that, I don't think so, but I'm troubled by it nevertheless. The Bible doesn't give me a lot. Well, I guess Hannah, in Hannah's case, you know, we could say she was answered. She got her sign, you know, she got her son. So I guess maybe God, you know, communicates with Hannah and with the rest of us by giving us signs rather than words.
So I'm gonna give two thoughts on that. Thank you for sharing. And then I see Arlette also has a hand up. So briefly, the first practice, the way that I would respond as a practice note is, that's a great next conversation, right? Why am I the one talking to you? Are you talking to me? How do you talk to me? You know, like, will you talk to me? Like, that's a great, you know, it came up to you in your practice with feeling and emotion. So that's the place it should be engaged, right? You should, that's a great direction. And I will only say in my own experience, and this is really just my own experience, one thing I've been noticing is just like, for me, this is just my own way of understanding these things. I'll give a really brief example, because we've got some people who still want to talk and we still want to look at the Hippo to do text. But I have been teaching up a storm, and pretty much people who've asked me to teach, I've more or less said yes if I can. And somebody asked me just to sing some of the Musaf Piyutim late last night. And I was kind of like, oh, the timing, but okay, right? And then I was going to be doing Ve'yatayu, which is this great call and response tune, which really needs like a response. So I asked the person who asked me, like, would you be the responder? And she's like, ugh, with the way that Zoom works, I don't think it's going to match up. She's like, do you think maybe one of your children would do it? And I didn't even ask my sons. I knew that was a non-starter. But I asked my daughter, who actually was really into it. And we ended up having the most fun. And I look back on that moment when she said, could you ask one of your kids to do it? You know, like, she had no idea that she was like opening the gate into like what I've been trying to do for this whole month of Elul, which has involved my family in different ways, you know? And then there it was. And all I had to do was ask a question, hear the answer, and not even understand it, but just hear it enough to move the next step forward. So, all right, Arlette.
Yes, so I was wondering with, you know, because you asked this question with the prayer when you're hurt. And I was wondering what it has to do with being in your ego mode, when you know what I mean. Because when it's just for yourself, it might be harder. I think when you step out of that and just realize that you're yourself kind of be, part of the whole. Like Hannah was at some point not asking for herself anymore, but she was asking, somebody who be a prophet. And also the fact that it looked like she was drunk means she was not anymore in this egocentric mode. She was more in an other kind of mode. And it's hard to explain these other kind of modes unless you experience them. But there are moments that you feel, kind of part of a bigger whole. And maybe that's the moment that you also have the feeling that you're more heard.
Beautiful. Thank you, Arlette. And one way of saying that too is the very fact of feeling like you get out of yourself and out of your own narrowness, whether it's breaking an ego bound, right? Or actually lifting out of your own concerns, is that being answered in some way? Is that we open our mouths, but the actual experience of feeling transcendent or beyond ourselves is part of an answer? Yeah, Dara.
In our group, we talked a lot about the repetition of remember your maidservant and don't forget your maidservant. But Stuart actually said something that really resonated about this issue of being answered, at least to me, is we were also talking about, I think Jeannie brought up the sort of language, your maidservant and me, the very personal nature between Hannah and God, and how she's just talking about her relationship with God. And then Stuart said, I think she's reminding God that she's not a stranger. And, that in a way is being answered, that, this familiarity with God. And anyway, I just thought, thank you, Stuart, for using that word, because it, it implies the goal of personal prayer, I think, to feel that familiarity and closeness with God.
Beautiful. One of the names of God that we use in the liturgy is Bochen Levavot, right? The one who examines all hearts. And there's this idea, this theology that whether we say it or not, God knows it. And yet it occurs to me from your words, Dara, like how much in our prayers do we actually give the Holy One to work with? If we're just sort of reciting things, how much information are we actually giving to like what's important to us and what moves us and what our relationship is, and so Betsy, is your hand still up, or was that from earlier? No. Okay. So I think I'm going to take that into, oh, Sandy, did you want to say something?
Well, yeah. I just wanted to say that I struggle with prayer, asking for things that, it's an interpretation if it's really that the prayer was answered or that this was going to happen anyway. And I think when I'm praying and asking for things or hoping for things, I don't have a strong expectation they're going to materialize. So, this was clearly touted by the rabbis as an example of where you pray and your prayers are answered. But I'm not sure it works that way. And there's lots of instances in the Torah, but.
Yeah, well, I'll just point out, and then we'll get to the Hippolyte text, because it's a really important point, Sandy, that at least as I understand it, and I think in the text, not only is it a question of whether her prayer actually works, but what her prayer actually is, right? Because she doesn't ask for this boy to live with her. She says, give me this so I can give it back to you, right? And if we'd continued reading on, we'd see that like as soon as she finished weaning him, she brought him to Eli. And it's almost like this whole conversation with Eli and Hannah is making Shmuel, Eli and Hannah are his parents in that sense, not Elkanah and Hannah. I'm not suggesting anything untoward happened. Please understand what I'm saying. Like spiritually, like these are actually his parents, right? And Hannah only sees him once a year from then on out. So it's a real question, tying back into Arlette's point about like, what did she ask for? And even into Sarah Ann's point, like she didn't suffer anymore after the prayer. It tells us that she was, like whatever she needed happened in that moment, not later, when the pregnancy test, right? And so what's really going on there is I think a real question, and I wish we could delve into it some more. Let me just quickly share with you the Hipodadut piece from Sichot Haran. Prayer originally began with each person pouring out their heart before God in their own words and language. This is explained by Rambam, where he states that personal prayer was the main form of prayer prior to the institution of the set prayers by the men of the Great Assembly, who used Hannah's prayer as the model to make the Amidah. According to the law, even today, the original form of prayer remains, listen to this word, primary. Besides following the order of prayers established by the men of the Great Assembly, it is extremely beneficial to make a regular practice of offering your own prayers and requests from the depths of your heart in the language you understand best, asking God to help you serve them truly. This is the essence of prayer, and this is the way all the tzaddikim attained their high levels. There's no equivocation here. There's no saying that group, communal, fixed prayer is not good. It's important, but the primary address is the personal address to God that we are working on. Okay, so one last note. I really recommend sometime during your Rosh Hashanah experience, it could be the walk to Tashlich or the walk back. It could be part of Tashlich if you're out and you're able to do that. It could be around the shofar, depending on how you're hearing it. Take a moment where you feel an opening and use it. Don't necessarily even be open to listening for when your heart might be open, and then take the form that you've already practiced and just open out further with your own prayer. That's my suggestion for over Rosh Hashanah. Just really listen for when you might be really actually ready to open up. And again, it might be some deep, God of hosts, Hannah making her own name for God. I want to note, just like we've heard before, right? From each person almost, they create a name for God. But it might just be, it's so hard and I wish I could hear you. It could be anything. Could be anything. All right. So let's feel free to unmute. Let's close with our one-word prayers. And for this round, let's just do one word that we've either experienced today or that we'd like to, either for ourselves or for everyone, bring into 5781 together. Something we all want to make a bracha, a Shana Tova. It doesn't have to just be Tova, Shana, whatever we want. All right, so I'm going to go in the order of my pictures. Stuart.
I'm speechless. I'm sorry.
Okay, would you like me to come back to you?
Okay.
Okay. Linda.
Deepening.
Susan.
Pouring out.
Beverly.
Answered prayers.
Betsy.
Exploring.
Judah.
Hope.
Sandy.
Gratitude.
David.
Gratitude.
Jeannie.
May it be enough.
Sandra.
Express yourself.
Dara.
Solace.
Sarah Ann.
Affirmation.
Arlette.
Sunlight.
Gary. Okay, I think we may have lost Gary. And I will add, I've often said community, but I'm going to change it to communion. May we feel accompanied.
And I could add closeness.
Beautiful. Amen, amen, amen. Shana, all of these things. May it be so. And caller one, please. Yes.
So I'd like to add holy listening, shmati, really being heard.
Wonderful. Thank you for saying that. We hear you, and we bring our prayers that we hear and that we are listened to deeply. Shana Tova, everyone.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Yeah.
Rabbi.
Shana Tova. Bye.
Darko